Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of the seminal science fiction films of the 1950s. It's been remade numerous times, and who knows just how many TV shows have done a Body Snatchers episode. But today, let's discuss the original 50s classic and see how well it holds up. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is Tara.
Greetings, citizens.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and we've watched the movie and we talk about it. It's really quite that simple. And coming up on today's show, we have a vote winner every month at patreon.com/mailfuzztv. Our patrons can vote on a movie, and they voted for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which beat two other 50s movies that have also been remade. It was a kind of a convoluted theme, to be honest. But Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1956 original version, is what we're talking about. So that is what we're going to get into today. We'll start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we go into spoilers. So without further ado, we'll get into it. The premise is simple. People are being replaced by something else. And there's mystery and stuff. We'll get into it. But yes, classic 50 sci-fi, which have you seen this version before? I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I've seen this version before.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, so have I. So this was not a first time watch for either of us. So we'll get into it.
It had been a while, but I definitely remember watching it.
Do you know, it hadn't been that long for me. I think I watched this and talked to Connor about it, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Which is, I mean, it's a while now, but it's not that long compared to some of the other movies we do on here where I'm like, I've not watched this in 15 years.
Yeah, I'm talking like 20 plus years.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so so you're saying it's longer than the gap between this and the remake?
Yes.
Which was 22 years for the record. So
yeah, I was probably like early teens when I saw this. Just like on the couch on a Saturday. Oh, this is on. I'll watch it.
That sounds plausible. It's just, that's the funny thing, is that these older movies, like, they're very tame by like modern censorship standards, so you tend to be able to put them on in the afternoon without any complaints.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have to like have HBO or something else to watch it either. You could watch it on just regular movie channels. They tend to play a lot of black and white films when I was a kid anyway.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, part of it's because they're cheap probably, but I think part of it's also because they don't have to worry about editing them or muting anything or anything like that, because it comes from a very conservative time, which is actually relevant for the topic of the film, which we'll get into probably in spoilers, I imagine, when we're talking about more in-depth parts of it. But yeah, all right, well, it had been a while. You watched it again. How did you feel about it?
I really like it. I think this movie is really well directed. It feels like a really long episode of The Twilight Zone, but in a good way. I sort of hate the bookends of the film. I think it just, I did read in the trivia. I didn't read the trivia. I just read, like, when you scroll down IMDb and it says trivia and there's one thing there. Yeah. It says that this was added by the producers.
Not a shock. So just for reference here, what Tara's talking about is that the movie is basically, it's got a little bit of narration, and it sort of starts with like the main character sort of looking crazy, and he's telling the story of what's happened,
and then it goes doodle, doodle, doodle,
basically 1
week ago.
And then it ends with a little bit at the end of like him at the end of the story, which, so it's not a spoiler because he's clearly telling the story from the start of the movie, so we're going to come back to it eventually, but. So
I mean, it kind of works because I don't know that there are really any other scenes where he's not in them, because even when we leave characters alone for a while that aren't him, we get it only from his perspective, really. So it does work if you want to say that he's telling their story. I don't think it really breaks the rules.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters.
I think I would have preferred a different ending.
I don't think it really matters, and I mean that as a criticism in the sense that I don't think it adds anything to the movie. I don't think it really takes anything away either, the narration. But I will agree that the very last 60 seconds I think feels tacked on and just kind of
You kind of expect Rod Serling to start talking at any moment.
Well, no, I've got a particular problem though with just the last like 30 seconds and just like how it quickly, neatly wraps everything up in a way that feels like the movie wasn't going that direction the entire time.
Definitely not. Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't expecting to start with like what is basically my only real negative, to be honest, because I think the movie's very good. Otherwise,
I really love the two leads in this. I like their characters just in general. I think they're really good, likable people, and I like that they're both divorced adults in like the 50s, and we're watching like their romance. You don't really see stuff like that in the 50s, because it breaks the idea of the nuclear family and everything so perfect. That perfect Hays Code image.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's quite unique. No, I think the movie's very well paced. I think it's very tightly directed. It's 80 minutes, which isn't unnatural for the time period, but I do think it uses its time very wisely. Nothing about it feels rushed to me. I think it starts planting the seeds, no pun intended, at the start of the movie, and builds upon it in a natural pace, and then when stuff starts popping off later and we actually start getting the payoff to things, nothing about it feel, because I think, see, when you watch a lot of movies that are just from before this time period that are like 70 minutes, and I say this having watched one last night, is I feel like even though you expect that to be okay because they wrote a movie that was supposed to be 70 minutes, a lot of them actually feel like, no, they really should be like 90, 100 minutes, but they just get to the 70-minute mark and quickly end. And I feel like a lot of them feel that way. This doesn't have that. And the funny thing is that the little tacked on bit at the end that kind of feels abrupt, it only feels abrupt because that little bit's tacked on. If it just ended without the bookend part, it would actually end completely natural and fine and wouldn't feel weird at all. So
yeah, and we didn't have to start with him like, we see him, a man who's been through a lot of stuff. We don't know what that is yet until he starts telling the story. But like, it would have been fine if you just progressed the story as it was in the film.
Yeah, and we could talk about what it does when we get to spoilers, but for the most part, I don't even want to focus on it much, because honestly, I always forget these bookends because they're so not the memorable part of this movie. They are not that big of a deal because they just don't stick in your memory. All of the actual main story is what you actually remember from the film, and that's the stuff that's good from start to finish, and has moments of tension, it has moments of good direction, all that stuff.
It's very creepy. Just the idea of it is so good. I know it was adapted from a book, but like the concept is really frightening, and it feels very Twilight Zone, or very like something is, it might be replacing people, and it's like, well, are you next, kind of a deal. Like, everyone's afraid to go to sleep and blah blah blah, but like, it's the idea of like feeling like you're temporary, like I don't know, the existential crisis that you go through, like I could be gone tomorrow, or like, and like nobody will care, or fall into some sort of like I don't know, like there's a lot of parallels to other things. I mean, I'm sure like communism is a big one in this because it's the time of that, but also maybe like fear of space, and like space travel, all the space stuff was happening at this time, or at least the talk about it, right? And so maybe people were having fears of that, nuclear power, who knows. It's 50s, so like all the big stuff in science fiction was popping off at that time.
I actually have a lot of things to say about this in terms of what the movie's actually about, because there's a lot of interesting like discussion about it, in the sense of like how much of it's intentional, how much of it is just kind of there because it's of its time and because it naturally just fits into those things. And there's like people involved with the film who claim there was never any subtext intended about anything. It was just supposed to be a fun science fiction thriller. The director, on the other hand, acknowledges that there's clear things that you can parallel it to, but even to him, when he was making the movie, he intentionally didn't try to emphasize any of it because it wasn't meant to be the point.
I wasn't sure, but there was one line in the movie where I was like, okay, that sounds like a communist thing about like losing individuality. And I was like, well, that seems very much of his time, and it's awfully coincidental that line is in there. But I do think it is a love story first.
Sure. But no, to stay on the like what it's about though, because there's a lot of like conflicting opinions on this, because it can be read very extremely in two different ways. It can be read like what you've brought up already, which is that this is a movie about the fear of communism infecting America, and like it's slowly taking over and all that stuff, right? That's there. The other thing that's there though is the opposite, because that's a very right side thing. That's a right leaning fear that this movie would be about.
A lot of, stuff in that time was, propagating that.
No, of course. But the other side of it, though, which is a bit more left-leaning, is the idea that it's actually more of a fear of McCarthyism, and that it's about conforming to the acceptable standard that society has. And this obviously extended from the fear of communism at the time, which is that if you see anyone acting different or weird or suspicious, you maybe should report them, or that kind of thing. So this movie,
like blacklisted and stuff like that.
Yeah,
in fact, who were blacklisted.
In fact, one of the people involved in this film was a writer who was blacklisted in Hollywood, because any writer who was even like someone even claimed at one point they might have ties to communism, they'd be blacklisted, right? So the movie has a lot of things that you can clearly fit into that mold as well, which is that this is about a fear of conformity, and effectively either way you're talking about the loss of self independence and like your own character and your own what's the word I'm looking for, your own
individuality.
Thank you. It only took like 3 minutes for the word to come out.
You gotta say, help me, Tara, help me.
But it's like, I stopped trying to think of the word and I just got annoyed that you were staring at me without even suggesting. Even if it was a dumb suggestion, you didn't say anything. I'm like, what the hell, woman? Just say something, anything. I'm not
You'll
waiting.
Get there. Just work at it.
No, I shifted to annoyance. Anyway. Yes, it's the fear of the loss of individuality and the idea, and that's something that would come up a lot in this time period, even something that's over a decade later, like Night of the Living Dead, where it's definitely 100% intentional, is that the zombies represent this, like, the mass of conformity and conforming to what the status quo wants you to be. This movie, it naturally can be applied to it, and if you want to read it more of a fear of communism, you can. I think the opposite about this being a fear of America itself, expecting everyone to be what they view as the, and this kind of fits into the 50s as well, this idea of like everyone has to have the white picket fence and everyone has to be what we consider to be the correct kind of American. Like that like fits a bit more for me, and I don't know if that's just because I am inherently going to lean more to the left interpretation, because that's kind of where I side with more generally, but I think it is a more interesting idea that it's like society itself having these expectations of you and trying to make you fit into them, and it's seeping through. But if you want to read it as communism, it works as well. I
mean, you can. I mean, I said communism, sure, but like McCarthyism works just as well, and it's probably more correct because this is a Hollywood movie, so it makes more sense that it would be more on that side. But it just seems like everything from that time is fear of communism. But I mean, also just, what I already mentioned with the two leads being both divorcees and like, finding love again. A love story between two divorced adults. It's not really something you see in a 50s film.
I think that...
Especially the woman being divorced also.
That does feel, I guess, progressive, for lack of a better word, for the time, which makes me lean towards, again, the left interpretation of what the movie is.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. And there's other little things in there as well that kind of feel a little bit ahead of its time and how it's like dealing with its characters. But that said, there's also very definitely 1950s tropes, like characters are like oddly nice to each other in this small town in a way that just feels like a movie and not real life, but that's just of its time.
Yeah, or like even like, okay, you should probably call the cops, and they're like, why don't we wait till the morning and then we'll report this? Like, it seems like in the real world that would be problematic if you waited a whole day to report like a
Yeah.
possible dead body or something.
Yeah, there would probably be, I don't know, obstruction of justice or something like that would probably thrown at you. Yeah.
So like, why'd you hold on to this for a day? Or
Just to see if anything interesting happened.
wouldn't you know it? We'll talk about that in spoilers.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, like, there's definitely things like, so, I mean, like anything, it's the same with watching original Star Trek or even Twilight Zone, right? There's a lot of things, and those are from, like, the 50s, get to the 60s, and later 60s for Star Trek, is that for as progressive those things are, and you can look back and recognize the progressive elements, there's also a lot of stuff that's still very dated, because by today's standards, it's not that progressive, but obviously very progressive for the time period. And I think...
we
and
understand, though, yeah.
And I think this movie is, like, kind of a similar lines without, much like the director and, like, multiple creators of the movie have said, they weren't going for this ultra, like, political commentary of a film, even though, in hindsight, we're all, like, analysing it like that, which I think happens for a couple of reasons. But even without all that, the fact that there is these little things in there that make it feel like it is a bit progressive, even if they're not trying to make a statement with the progressiveness, just kind of, like, does make it stand out to other movies from the time period. And I think even if, like, there's not a shred of anything intentional, although, again, the director did seem to acknowledge in an interview towards the year 2000-ish, I think this interview was from, that he wasn't trying to emphasize it, but he recognized that the comparison to McCarthyism would be there. Like, people would be able to talk about it and bring it up. I do
Sounds
think,
to me like Tolkien when he says the Lord of the Rings was not influenced by World War One. You're like, but there's just so many parallels, and you were in it, and you saw your brethren die. So like,
oh yeah, he's full of shit.
it's there.
Or he was full of shit. You know what I mean? But no, I think the even if it's not intentional, right? Let's just say it isn't, right? It doesn't matter to an extent if it's intentional or not, right? Obviously, you can read the text a little bit differently in that sense. The text being the movie in this case, but the thing about, and this is something that comes up with horror movies a lot, is that if you look at trends of horror movies, even if the horror movies individually aren't necessarily trying to be about something or have a subtext or have some sort of political statement, if you look at, like, a decade of horror, you can kind of, like, tell which decade it comes from sometimes, just because, oh, there was a trend of this type of movie because the general
This is
fear
what
at the
everyone
time.
feared.
Yeah. So, in a similar vein, even if this wasn't intentionally going for these particular things, I think that core fear of the movie, which is the loss of the individuality, like, regardless of, like, how you interpret, like, what political, like, thing causes that, the fact that that's what the core fear is, the reason why that probably even appealed to the filmmakers to make a story about it is because it's what everyone was feeling at the time. Even if they didn't sit down and say, hey, everyone's feeling this because of this thing and we're going to make a movie about that, the fact that it just struck a chord and says, oh, that's a cool fear to make a movie about, is still inspired by the fact that the political landscape of the world, of the country, whatever, is still influencing them, even if they're not actively making a movie about it.
I wonder if it's also talking a bit about the Hays Code. I know it's like the one thing I know from movie history, so I always bring it up. But there is a little bit of, like, we can't make the stories that we want to make or the love stories we want to tell because there are all these restrictions. I mean, there's a moment in this film where I'm like, things are getting pretty hot for this movie at this time. And it definitely implies that they, like, sleep together. And it's, I don't know, it just seemed like a lot more than you would get in other films from this time. Because you'd have to be so careful. But maybe because it's a genre science fiction film, they had to, they still had to dance around things. But, like, I don't know, it just seemed like a bit steamier. And then, like, other romance stories you see at the time where the dialogue is all their flirtation doesn't feel real, where in this one it does.
That's a fair observation. But on the first part of it about, like, movies not being allowed to talk about certain things, like, that was very true. And you bring up the Hays Code. I don't know if this is specifically Hays Code, but there was certainly a thing at the time where, in the 50s and I think maybe the 40s as well, there was such a fear of actually doing movies about anything political because they basically didn't want to, like, influence anything. There was kind of a strict thing from the studios where they don't outright talk about a lot of things. Outside of a very specific few examples where the movie would literally be about communists or something, they wouldn't bring it up. They wouldn't want movies to be about those topics and actually have a statement to make, right? They would basically try and make everything kind of like today, like everything, like when we're talking about like mainstream Hollywood and like, oh, all these big franchise movies have to just be like, fun for everyone. So it has to have the right amount of humor, all that stuff. This is almost like the 1950s version of that. But as you say, the way around it was subtext, and it was science fiction and horror and genre movies like that, where, okay, but if you have aliens that stand in for the thing that we're talking about, then all of a sudden we can get around it and do a movie about the thing without actually saying the thing. So
yeah, totally.
That said, though, the writer, the producer, the director, the lead actor on this movie have all said that none of the political commentary was intended.
That's wild.
Yeah, this was me looking into it a little bit earlier. I was looking just to see what people have said about it, and like very quickly it was like, no, they've all denied that this was like intentional. But everyone analyzes it and talks about it. Everyone brings it up, and even if they're completely right, the idea that it's so thick with this stuff, despite not being intentional, allegedly, then it's just a great example of how some work ends up being like just covered in subtext, even if it wasn't an intentional thing by the creators.
Yeah, I mean, even all the sequels that I've seen also have like the same kind of message. So it's like clearly they want to remake it because they want to make a political statement about the current times.
I mean remakes, right? You said sequels.
Yeah, remakes.
Yeah.
Or other adaptations of the book and stuff like that. That's like the thing they want to do. They were like, well, we have another time. There's Vietnam or whatever is happening.
I don't know.
The War on Terror. Let's make a new version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
I don't know if the writer of the book is quoted as saying he didn't intend any subtext, but I mean, maybe it's the sort of thing where it was just in the book.
It would just be easy, right?
Yeah. But maybe what I'm saying is maybe it's just in the book and therefore adapting it with it. Unless you're changing so much that you're gutting it, you get the subtext by default because you're adapting the story, so you get it.
Maybe.
But there's so much in there though that feels like just little moments with how they react to things, or like when it becomes kind of like it's us against everyone else and everyone's like a part of the system and we're the outsiders now. Like there's so much of it that still just feels like it fits all the subtext that you want to like throw at it. And but it does raise an interesting conversation about the intention of creators and whether or not that even matters if the story still lends itself to the subtext or to a reading like that. I guess that's the beauty of art in some ways.
I mean, it's not an adaptation, but it also really reminds me of The Stepford Wives, which we did a couple years ago, and I loved that film.
I mean, that movie's definitely intentionally political, though.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And also based off of a book. I don't know how old the book is. Probably around the time that the movie came out.
Yeah.
Based on the subject matter, but that also kind of feels like this is a precursor for it.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, like, if it feels cruel to say it doesn't matter if they intended it or not, tough, your movie has this in it, so this is what we're going to focus on. But let's be honest here, it makes the movie really good. Like, I mean, it's an effect, even on a surface level, don't get me wrong, it's an effective sci-fi horror movie with creepy moments, a good threat, a nice bit of tension, and as you say, two, likable leads who have good chemistry, and that's all fine. But it also has this that elevates it and makes it even better because it has all this extra juice to it. And, I don't know. So, tough.
Yeah.
So basically that's all to say. I acknowledge that some of the creators insist that they didn't intend any of the subtext, but it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it anyway. It's absolutely still there.
It's hard to watch it and not leave going, yeah, that was I don't know, that felt intentional. Especially there's the one line I bring out earlier.
Well,
but it was it seemed really on the nose.
No, but this is the thing. Like, I would never have thought watching the movie, oh, this seems intentional, because I would never have doubted that it was intentional. The only reason why we're even having this conversation is because I've looked it up.
Because you brought it. Yeah, you brought it up.
Because all these people involved have said, we weren't aware of any like political commentary when we were making this movie.
Maybe they're just sticking to the lie, like they had to say it early on to
Well,
get the movie made, and they're just sticking to it.
Are they scared the studio from 1956, which probably doesn't even exist anymore, is going to come after them with the Hitmen?
Maybe they're afraid of their credibility. Who knows?
I mean,
the lead actor did live a long time.
Yeah, Kevin McCarthy, he's in a bunch of other stuff. I mean, we've not done it yet, but we will one day do Inner Space, which he's in.
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
Yeah.
I've seen that movie many times, actually. He played a lot on TV when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it's really funny.
He also does have a cameo in the 70s remake, which we obviously will get to in the not too distant future. So.
And he was in an episode of Twilight Zone we watched.
Of course.
The one about the man who never dies.
Yeah.
And he was like, he's in the history book, but he's also a teacher or something, a history teacher.
I'll take your word for
Walter
it.
Jameson.
I don't remember it well enough to.
Long live Walter Jameson. And he's in the Twilight Zone movie, which we haven't done yet.
Uh-huh. Well, here's a bit of trivia for you that I did see. I don't usually go looking for trivia, but I was looking for analysis to back up some, subtext thoughts and things like that. And I found a bit of trivia that was too borderline problematic, but also really funny.
Uh-oh.
So while they were making this movie, obviously we've not talked too much about the premise yet, but obviously, people are being replaced by, something, right? And there's these pods that are involved in that process. During the shooting of this movie, the director, Don Siegel, broke in to Dana Wynter, the actress who plays the female lead, Becky, broke into her house, or wherever she was staying, and put one of the props of the pods under her bed so that when she woke up the next day, she saw a pod under her bed, and it scared the living shit out of her.
It probably scared her because she's like, holy shit, who the hell broke into my house and put this movie prop here? Not because she actually thought she was getting body snatched.
I know,
she's not an idiot.
It's such an insane... I mean, I have to assume, but I have to assume that they were close enough that he did not think this was like a huge stepping over our line or whatever.
I hope that's the case.
Yeah. I hope they were close enough that after hitting them a couple of times, she laughed about it. But wild.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Poor women.
It's a. I mean, it's just a criminal prank, effectively, but so.
Yeah, I don't like pranks.
Nor do I, really, to be honest. Nor do I. I think on some demented level, I do like the idea of a director trying to convince their actor that they're actually like the victim of the plot of the movie. and some sort of weird. Well, maybe not if it's like a super realistic thing, but when it's something like, obviously fake. It's obviously science fiction.
Yeah.
I think that's quite funny, but not to the level where I condone breaking into someone's house.
I do have questions about how the pods work when we get into spoilers, though.
Oh, sure. We could talk about pods and stuff. Yeah. No, I mean, the cast, obviously, we're kind of dipping into this now. So, Kevin McCarthy is the likable leading man. He's very good. He kind of overcomes the generic, leading man of the 50s quality. I think he has enough.
He's got a great chin.
He's got a chin. He's got a bit of charisma. His flirtations with Becky, played by Dana Wynter, are pretty solid. There's like a moment, because they've all stayed in the same house at one point in the movie, and when she's making breakfast, he comes over for a kiss, and she sort of stops him in kind of like a jokey way and says, "No, go get eggs," or something like that. And it's just, like you say, there's still a little bit of a, there's an implication a few times in this movie that he really wants to have sex with her. And I feel like movies in this time period tend to dance around that a little bit more than maybe what this was doing. Or I don't know. Like you say, it just feels a bit more natural.
You're used to the wind sweeping through the hair and the big romantic gestures that are way too much for reality, but for a romantic fantasy, they work fine. This feels very real and raw, and they've had feelings for each other forever, and now there's an opportunity to get back together, and they're both into it, and I don't know, it just feels like a real relationship that's that's hot. clearly really into each other.
Barring maybe a little more awkwardness when they first bump into each other, just because they're supposed to, they were college,
Well, yeah, and
couples or
as
whatever.
far as he knows, she's still married.
Yeah. But it feels like they're all to smiley at each other immediately. Like, it's almost like they skipped the part where they awkwardly realize, oh, wait, we're both single now? Oh, wait. Oh.
Yeah. He can't resist. It's too carnal.
Yeah. There's also Jack, who's like a relatively prominent character in this. So there's a couple as well that they end up teaming up with for a chunk of the movie. I'm only mentioning him because he sounds like Bob Kane, who created Batman. He's got the exact same voice. It was really throwing me for a loop.
I thought he had a bit of a Jack Klugman vibe, but...
Oh, I could see that too. But the voice sounded a lot like Bob. I don't know if that's like a specific part in New York or something, that accent or what. But
his wife I recognize as Morticia Addams from the Addams Family TV show.
Oh, really? Okay.
She's blonde in this, though. Normally, in the show, she's got the long, straight Morticia Addams hair.
I've never seen the original Addams Family TV show, so I would never have clocked her.
It's quite funny. It's a good show.
I'm sure. It spawned many a things. So, hell's a Addams Family TV show currently, between seasons 1 and 2. I mean, it's only on Wednesday, but still part of its legacy.
Oh yeah, the Wednesday. I haven't watched it.
I saw the first episode.
I haven't watched any of the modern Addams Family stuff.
Wait, have you not seen the movies?
Only the 90s movies.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've seen the 90s movies, surely.
Well, I mean, like modern as in right now, not modern since we were born.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, relative to the original show in the 50s or whatever, like the 90s is still pretty modern. This is like the
third iteration of Addams Family.
Well, they had the animated one a few years ago, so fourth, technically?
Well, I'm including that. I haven't seen that.
Okay.
And I think they made 2 movies, but I heard they were just terrible.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about them, really. So, yeah, I assume they're at least forgettable, if not bad.
It's too bad. I would have seen it if they had any kind of good buzz, but they didn't.
It's so sad. Raul Julia, he was so good in those 2 movies.
He's the best Gomez. Yeah.
It's a shame. So, no, cast is good. I think one of the things as well that I saw when I was looking about for comments from the director and stuff is apparently the director kind of went out of his way to make sure that the special effects department from the studio or whatever never got involved, because he didn't want it to be like a 50s monster movie with the goofy suits or anything like that. So everything that's that's a prop or a prosthetic or something like that it's very low key. You see pods, you see some bodies, but they're kind of just off to the side, so they're a lot more creepier because they're kind of just normal and they're just there, as opposed to it'd be very easy to have before they're humans they look kind of monstrous and have goofy bits to them or something. It would be very easy to do that.
They're like a plant that's that's growing. It's just a tree, and then the tree becomes a human. Yeah.
So I think that adds a lot. I think that decision to try and keep it grounded.
There's one moment where someone is attacking one of the growing things, and I'm like, ooh, that's pretty I thought that was actually a very good special effect, because you see the thing go into it. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I thought actually the special effects in this are pretty good, because they have versions of people that aren't quite complete.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying the ones that are there are not good, but I'm saying that there was almost he had to go out of his way to stop there being more. He tried to keep it as minimal as possible.
I mean, you think the studio would be okay with that because it's not going to cost them any money.
Nah, because they associate success, especially when you're doing science fiction B movies, as we have to have some big stupid monster, and that's why people go and see it in the drive-through, kind of thing. So it's one of those things where it's the studio thinking they know better than the creative mind, and sometimes they can. But
I think honestly, I think the title is so good, because the title will get butts and seats, especially for a 50s drive-in. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Invasion already kind of implies aliens, and then Body Snatchers, oh, it's a horror movie and a sci-fi movie by aliens. Let's go make out in the movies.
Yeah. And of course, the director that's went on to do Dirty Harry, which is a very good film. He also did Escape from Alcatraz, also with Clint Eastwood, which I've not seen yet, but it's kind of been on my to-do list for a long time. So he's went on to do some proper, well remembered
I do think the direction
movies.
is quite strong in a lot of the scenes. There's some real creepy, segments and just good lighting effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff, especially
All the night looks good too, because normally like a lot of night scenes, you just have random spotlights everywhere. You're like, I don't, this doesn't look good, or it looks like you're in a dark stage with some fake potted plants around you. But I think all the night shots actually look good, and it looks like they're outside at night.
Yeah, it seems like they're shooting on location for a lot of it. But yeah, there's a lot of the creepier moments where he'll, like, unlike some directors, he'll just throw Dutch angles everywhere, regardless of the
There are
the
some
scene.
in this.
Well, the point I was about to make, if you let me finish my sentence, was that unlike some directors who just throw Dutch angles around, he only does them at certain key moments so that the world feels weird because someone's just seen something otherworldly. So you get a Dutch angle of that person's reaction, and it makes you, it accents like the weirdness and the like. Oh, something's not quite right here. So that's what I was trying to say. Yes, I know there's some Dutch angles. That was my point. They're utilized well. Thank you.
I'm glad. I'm glad you got to your point.
No thanks to you.
What are you talking about? I got you there faster.
No, you didn't. You slowed things to a halt.
That's what I'm here for.
Bloody hell. So no, the direction's really good. I think the movie does feel, even though it's a low budget movie, I think the budget I read earlier was $380,000, which even at the time it was made is pretty low. So like, I think that money's put to good use where by shooting on location, by keeping the special effects to the absolute bare minimum, it always feels like relatively high quality, and it feels like a movie. It doesn't feel, as much as you're saying it feels like it could be a long episode of The Twilight Zone, I think that just comes down to it's a sci-fi movie in the 50s, it's black and white. I feel like
Honestly, I think the bookended parts also make it feel a little bit cheaper, and like it would be a Twilight Zone intro and end point.
Well, forget those though. The rest of the movie doesn't feel that way though.
Agreed.
So, no, it's very good. So I think we'll get into the spoilers then, so we can talk about everything at this point. So, like we said, there's a intro where you see him like all crazy. The Dr. Bennell, his name is, or just Miles. I guess we'll go with Miles. That's easier. No,
I think it's Star Trek.
Who's Miles in Star Trek?
Miles O'Brien. When was the last time you watched Deep Space Nine?
He's always O'Brien. He's techie engineer O'Brien. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Transporter Chief Extraordinaire.
Yeah. Well, he's not Transporter Chief in Deep Space Nine. He's
got promoted to handyman.
Maintenance. He runs the ship. He's
still a chief.
Yeah. Yeah. He's something chief. Anyway, so he's all crazy. He's saying, "Listen to me. Like you're gonna have to believe me." And I think probably the biggest sign of how tacked on this stuff is, and probably the narration in general. But there's like, when it goes to the footage of the main story, and he's narrating, his narrator voice sounds like really calm. It's like he's just in a booth telling a story to someone. He does not sound like the crazy man who was just yelling about, "You have to listen to me," like just seconds before. So like honestly, yeah, most of my complaints just come from like this opening and ending that has been tacked on, that to make it more like, I guess, mainstream friendly, I guess.
I guess this also feels like the Twilight Zone part to me too, where everything's just like, okay, we're gonna get a bunch of doctors in a set and we're gonna film them like saying, "Oh, this man's clearly crazy." I don't know, like that. This part feels the most Twilight Zone, as in it feels cheap.
Sure, yeah. Because the movie is actually quite cheap, relatively speaking, but it uses its budget very well. So
yeah, but it looks like a real town, and like everything's shot like on site when you go to the doodaloo 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 flashback.
Yeah, is it a real town?
I Oh, I mean, it doesn't look like the Universal backlot.
No, it does look like it's shot in a real town. What I mean is the town that they're calling it, is that a real place?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
They
it sounds
said like Santa Mira or something.
It sounds made up. Sounds like a.
It definitely is supposed to be California, but I don't think it's a real one.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a Sunnydale style, where we're in the state, but we've got our own little made up town just for the sake of the plot, which is fine.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I don't think so. I've been to a lot of Southern California due to my job, and I don't think that it's a real place.
Yeah, watch out for the pods if you do ever end up in this place.
Always.
So the movie right away though sets up this idea that some of the locals have been wanting to see him because he's a town doctor. He's just getting back from, it's not vacation, he was doing like a seminar or something like that, but he's back in town and there's like a list of people who wanted to see him, and right away it sets up this idea that some people are scared of their relatives because they don't think they're quite them anymore. And the first time you see it, it's a child who doesn't think his mother's really his mother. So you sort of write it off as, it's a dumb kid. he's being a kid. So even he, the character, writes it off as, kids being awkward and whatever, right? It doesn't. But then of course, the love interest, Becky, when he bumps into her and they have their sweet like reunion, she just casually mentions that her cousin's freaked out because she doesn't think that her uncle or her father, Becky's father, her uncle, you know what I mean, like like he isn't him, right? Even though he looks like him, he has all the memories. This is a plot point that's brought up early on, is that he does seem to have all the knowledge of the person, but there's something about him that's just not quite right. Like he's
the first one that we actually see, also in theory, unless there's others that are in the background, but like because the kid is with like the grandma. So she's acting like a normal person. We don't get to see the mom, right?
I thought that was the mother, but you may be right. Maybe the grandmother. I don't remember.
I thought it was the grandma. And
it's
like
the grandmother definitely.
Something.
Well, it's the grandmother definitely later because that's who he goes to stay with for the night when they eventually bring him into the doctor and he's like freaking out. He doesn't want to go back to his mother. But I thought that scene at the start where he almost runs over him. And he says, "What's wrong with him?" He says, "Oh, he doesn't want to go to school." I thought that was the mother.
I just assumed like, oh, he doesn't want to go to school because maybe there's pods at school. Maybe he doesn't want to go to like public areas where there's a lot of like, schools had nap times.
No, I think you're reading into it too much. I think it's just that's her excuse for why he's running away. I don't think the people in the town know the specifics enough yet. They're just scared of people who seem off.
Okay.
It's not everyone. It's just like obviously it happens very quickly because it's like only a few nights before we're at the end of the movie and like the whole town's basically taken over and whatnot. But I think that's just the mother making up an excuse for why he's freaking out when in reality he's just scared of her because she's.
Okay.
So we get introduced to our doctor character properly. We get introduced to Becky. It sets up beforehand because he's talking to his nurse that that Becky's back in town, and he's like, that's interesting. And he's like, but she's married. I'm not going to, get involved. I can't be doing with that. And we find out that she was living in London with her husband presumably for X number of years. But they're both back in town and they end up they don't quite go to lunch. Like he invites her to lunch because he's about to go for lunch anyway. But the other plot point that's brought up here is that a lot of these people who were like determined to see him like in the last couple of weeks when he was gone, all of a sudden all of them are saying no, we don't need to see you, we're fine, I'm fine. So the implication being that all these people are now pod people, that they've all been taken over and they all feel fine now because all their ailments have went away. So that makes some sense. No,
it does. Pod people is just one of the names of my favorite Mystery Science Theater episode.
What else would you say I should call them then?
No, pod people is correct.
Okay. I just don't want a giggle every single time I say it. Like that, exactly. Good example of what I don't want every 2 minutes. Control yourself.
All right, pod people.
So yeah. So all this is set up. He has to take her out though. It's after he comes over to see the cousin because she tells him about her cousin who's scared about her dad not being him, and he comes to see her, and she's very adamant that he's like the emotion's gone, that he's not quite himself, that there's something missing. It's not really him. She can't quite put her finger on it exactly.
The subject of stroke never comes up. Even though he's outside working on the yard or whatever.
I mean, he does look quite fine health-wise. It's not like he's acting... he's acting strange to her, but he's not acting strange in the sense that, he looks like a fit man for his age, doing, lawn work or whatever. He's
maintaining the front of his house, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, he shrugs this off, but he can't help but obviously notice that that's two people now that have said, between the kid and then her, there's two people now that are saying someone is not who they are, right? Some close family member is not who they've always been, and it's kind of weird. And because he invites her to dinner, right? So him and Becky are going for dinner, and they run into like a psychiatrist, and he's like, "Hey, I've got someone to send over," and the psychiatrist basically just guesses what it is. And he's like, "Wait, how the hell did you guess that?" He's like,
like on the nose.
Well, it just so happens there's been like, I don't know, 25 cases of this exact same thing over the past week or so.
Yeah, it made me giggle because I'm like, okay, so should you call like the CDC or something? Clearly, there's a pretty significant pattern here of people not acting like themselves, and he says it appears to be contagious.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's because we lived through a pandemic, but this feels like a...
Well, I mean, those guys did too. There's been more than one pandemic.
Well, okay. I'm not ultra familiar on my recent pandemic-related history. What pandemic was in this time period?
I don't want to get the name wrong, but there's one in like the 1910s, right?
Yeah. That's like 45 years before this, though.
Yeah, but these men were ancient. They're all old.
They would have been kids probably when that happened. But yeah, so they're talking to these guys, and it's like, okay, that's funny, that's weird, all this is going on, blah blah, and they start their date. There's a little bit of a flirtation before they go in. There's like almost a kissy moment, not quite yet, but they're getting there.
There's some sparks.
But then there's a phone call at the restaurant for him. Small town, I guess. The doctor's at the restaurant. Call the restaurant for him.
There's actually the restaurant's completely empty, except for the one guy that still works there.
Yeah, and they're apparently going to be open for a while because he's like, "Oh, we'll be back later for dinner after I go see what's going on," which they never do, obviously, because they get into things. But I was like, "How late is this restaurant open? What time is it just now? Even like I don't know." My concept the time's all off, and none of these are complaints or critiques. This is just silly observations. Overthinking it, but this is where the movie really kicks it into high gear because this is when he's called to this couple's house, which is Jack and Teddy. Teddy being short for Theodora, the wife. So they go there and they called him, and it's all dark and moody, and there's like a tarp on the pool table. And lift it, and there's a body. It's like a sort of generic, and they never do a close up, so clearly they didn't have like a good like prop to like convey exactly what they said here. But what they say sounds quite creepy, which is it's like a person, but it's like the features aren't quite finished. Like, it's like the overall shape is there, but some of the details, there's no pores.
Yeah, there's
like
no. Yeah, but like everything's like perfect though, and even the wife's like, it looks kind of like you, husband. And I'm like, yeah, it looks a lot like you, husband. And he's like, nah, just like anything like me.
Well, she gets really specific. She's like, doctor, how tall would you say he is? And he's like, 5'10", give or take. He's like, how heavy would you say he is? I don't know, about 140. That's what my husband weighs, and how tall he is. So she's
even the hairline
out.
And stuff. I'm like, and the nose, because you see from the profile, and I'm like, it looks a lot like you, dude.
It's obviously based on him.
Yeah.
But so right away they're like, shit, what do we do with this? And it's like, well, we should call the police. But they check the fingerprints and like they're blank. There's no fingerprints. So again, it's more evidence to suggest that this, whatever it is, whoever this is, like they're not quite finished. It's like a work in progress.
Yeah, it's no one's like freaking out enough about it, except for maybe the wife. But I think like okay, maybe it's because they really believe that this isn't a real human being, so there's no need to report it to the police. But like, even the doctor is like, I suspect if I did an autopsy on him, I would find organs and they would be pristine. Like he thinks, I don't know, maybe it's like some lab experiment or something, like like a cloning thing. I don't know exactly, but he seems to suspect that this is a working human being. So maybe they should call the police.
Well, they eventually sort of say, okay, let's leave it till morning and see if anything happens. Let's see if it changes or whatever. And he goes off with Becky to take her home, blah, blah, blah.
The couple both fall asleep at the bar. Like, I thought that was like they're sitting on stools and like sleeping on the bar.
Well, I got the impression they were keeping watch of the weird body and probably just passed out at some point. But one of my favorite moments of the movie is when it cuts back to them. So obviously the doctor and Becky go and like he takes her home and whatever. There's a couple of bits we'll bring up, but it cuts back to them. There's this great shot looking from like just past the face of the body, looking over at her, and the eyes start moving, and it's proper creepy. It's like a proper horror movie moment.
Yeah.
And then the wife like starts looking over at it, and there's like this is where one of the first Dutch angles comes in. It's very dark and moody. The lighting's very low key. Like all of it just kind of presents this horror movie style moment. And then the thing she notices that sets her off, that makes her phone the doctor again, is that the husband in the earlier scene when the doctor was there, like he accidentally cut himself when he was making a drink, and she noticed
the fleshy part of the hand too.
Yeah.
Ow.
But she notices this cut forming on this body. So it's not just that it's mimicking him, it's mimicking him exactly as he is right now. It's not just like, it's not like it's like if you were cloned and the clone was perfect and all your, like if you had a scar that disappeared and all these sort of things. No, it's actually creating the faults as well. It's creating the wear and tear, so it's exactly correct.
That actually kind of subverted my expectation because, you know, when he cuts himself and he's bleeding from the hand, they focus in on it. So you're like, okay, so like he's going to get replaced and he's going to see there's no cut on the hand and he's going to be like, you're not you.
Yeah, you're thinking it's going to be a clue. Like later on, this is going to be a piece of evidence for us to know that something's changed. And instead, it subverts it by saying, no. This is exactly happening. Like he's getting this
which is
cut.
even scarier, that it's right up until the moment that this thing awakens is that it's copied you.
Which actually begs some questions that the movie I don't think ever really gets into in this version is like how like one pod where this like fake like duplicate comes from, like how they like connect to the person they're recreating and like how that link maintains and how it's established, all that stuff. Like it's
I don't know. I legit have no idea because like later on it seems to be different. So I don't know if like the way I imagined it is that this new version of you grows and replaces you. So like the version of you dies, whether it's by the hands of the pod person of you or maybe it takes your soul. I don't know. And you die. But later on, like it just takes a second for someone to fall asleep and they've been replaced, but they don't have like a pod person there. They just sort of become the replacement. So I don't know exactly how this is supposed to work in this adaptation.
Well, no, I don't think it's that it become the pod person. I think the implication is always that the pod version has replaced the real version that was there before. I think that's always an implication, even if you don't see. If anything, the bigger question is what happens to the real body. Because we know from just soon after this, when there's the fake version of Becky like in the basement and she's asleep, and the doctor has to like drag her out the house because she can't wake up. So it seems that there is a period of time when they fall asleep where the consciousness is like copied and like deleted from the original person, and that's what was happening to her. So later on, there's this sort of almost Nightmare on Elm Street thing of we can't fall asleep because we might end up duplicated and replaced. But like the question is though, is like would her body still be lying there, and if so, how are they like? Is there some sort of like? I feel like it glosses over that because that's probably too dark for a 50s movie for like to show these mass like scenes of like just tons of piles of bodies being burned or whatever is going on.
Yeah,
in the town. That's probably just too grim for this era, so they probably just didn't want to talk about it.
Fed into the soil, which will eventually grow more pod people.
Maybe it disintegrates or something once the mind's been taken. I don't know.
Because that's, I was confused by it when we get it later on. Like, if you fall asleep, then that's the opportunity for the pod people to come in and copy you, and you know, instead of you waking up, they wake up. But yeah, it's something that replaces you physically. But when we see later on it happened to somebody else, it doesn't seem to be the case, or at least it's not filmed in a way where I think that happened.
No, it still is. I think it still is happening. I think you just don't see it in camera. Like, I think the body swapped out with the fake version. I don't think anything in the movie ever implies to me that it just teleports to like where the person was. The question just is, where did the original body go effectively? But,
it just didn't seem like they were asleep for long enough for that to happen.
Yeah, well, to be fair though, this character, in this case Becky, this is right towards the end of the movie when this happens to her. She was already asleep earlier, and like the process had already like happened a lot. So maybe it was just a case of it just needed to finish, and that was it. Maybe.
Okay, maybe. I thought maybe she got stabbed also, but like the earlier version of her that they find was like part of the stabbing. No.
The stabbing?
Yeah, like our lead takes a pitchfork to the versions of them that are growing.
Sure, but maybe it's not like, maybe it doesn't have to connect to a specific one. Maybe it's like a network. So because the network's already like taken in, like, I guarantee this is not something they thought about at the time, but this is something we can use modern knowledge to explain it now. Is that it's more like a network of data that they have taken in our consciousness, and all they have to do is finish it and just download it into their new body that's nearby.
Okay.
That's all I've got for you. But
yeah, they're very efficient, these pod aliens.
Look, if you want an honest answer, is that when this happens later on, and it feels like she's only been asleep for like a minute, because that's all it's been since he walked away from her, and he comes back and she's switched. That's just a plot convenience, because it wants to have the scary moment where she's already switched, right? That's the real answer to it. I'm just trying to use what the movie's given me to explain it.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand, but like I didn't think at the time that it matched what had been shown earlier, and I was just a little bit like, oh, I wonder how that worked. But for the storytelling's sake, it doesn't really matter too much. It's more just the details of how the science fiction thing works, and you know, you like rules, you get it.
No, I do. I don't think anything in the scene though actually suggests that that's just the original body been taken over though. I think you're jumping to that because it's so quick that you in your head it feels like it must be, because like how else did the duplicate get in there? But
well, it's almost like when she wakes up, she is acting like herself, and she is holding him like she loves him, and then we get like he looks into her eyes, and her eyes like suddenly go blank, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not her anymore. So I don't know. It does feel like all of a sudden she's changed.
No, I didn't read it like that at all. I read it as she's just playing along, but it's when he kisses her at the end where he realizes it's not her, because he's not feeling the passion anymore.
The kiss was the giveaway.
Yeah. So I think it was just a case of this was just a duplicate now, but that's what that's, you know, because it's been set up the whole movie that the thing that's missing is the emotion, right? So it makes sense that the kiss, which, you know, and they've made a point of having these dramatic kisses a couple of times when they've been at their lowest points where they think they're going to die and they kiss, and it's a big moment. So I think that's what that is. That's setting up that he's going to notice the difference later on when they kiss, and he doesn't feel it anymore. He doesn't feel it coming from her. So that makes sense to me, I think.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. But that's at the end of the movie. That's your fault. So, yeah. So this is all very creepy. Doctor runs over, and he realizes at a certain point that, oh, it sounds like Becky's dad was already a pod person because he was working in the basement, and it's all creepy. So he goes to their house and breaks in and finds a fake Becky in the freezer or whatever it is in the basement, and that's when he grabs her and runs out of the house. And so these two couples now, our main two characters and this other couple, end up sort of like being together and sort of like staking out and like staying at his house for like a couple of days, and everyone's kind of like, you know, like he phones for help at one point because they actually try and convince him, because when they're looking, I think it's around in her, like they go to the police or whatever, and they go back to like, where the body is, and it's disappeared. Right, the guy's body's disappeared, and then they go to her basement, and that fake body's disappeared, and the cop just keeps like giving like reasons for why like this is all like nonsense. Oh, he must have burned off his fingerprints with acid because he's a criminal and he doesn't want to be caught. And sure,
doesn't sound like we can trust the cop.
Yeah, and then another cop shows up and says, "Yeah, we've got a body in the corners right now. He's got no fingerprints." And for like a minute, that convinces our main character that okay, maybe this has all just been some weird hallucination. We can just move on with our lives. And then he's having a barbecue with the other couple, and then they find the pods in the greenhouse, and it's a pretty cool effect because they sort of like pour out of the pods, and it's all bubbly, and they're being I don't know, birthed, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a fun time.
Yeah, the pitchfork to the like chest of the duplicate looks really good too. Like because it does look like the lead actor.
Yeah, no, I mean they freak out appropriately. I would say it's a good big moment where like all of a sudden like this has all been real, and they're still trying to replace us. We might be screwed. And then he tries phoning places, and it's like the person on the phone, the operator's also working against them and just lying about how they can't get through to anywhere. And it's like, shit, okay, we have to just make a run for it and get out of the town.
Yeah. It does do a good job of like filming the town to where it feels like it's a small town 50s Americana or whatever.
Yeah, it's got the town square that you see when he first comes out of town, because he works just on that square. That's where his doctor's office is. So you get a sense of him walking through it a couple times early on. So a little bit later, when him and Becky are hiding in his doctor's office, and it gets to the morning, and they look outside, and the entire townsfolk all just start walking towards each other and like have a meeting. Well,
everything looks normal at first, and they even comment on that. Like everyone's just doing things like they normally would until someone says, "But it's only like 7:15, and like everybody's out," which is odd because that's pretty early for everybody to be out. And then when that happens, everyone's just like, yeah, it's like they all have a hive mind and have suddenly have clicked in that they have to migrate to this one point.
Yeah, they all walk towards the town square.
It's super creepy when it happens.
And the cop starts like asking them, or basically giving out orders. They've got trucks with pods in them, so they're going to different towns, and it's spreading. And it's like, okay, is this town where it all started? And it does kind of sound like that, actually. But later on, there's an explanation from, when the doctor and Becky are found in his office, and like it turns out Jack, the other couple, they've already been got, right? They've already turned, and he shows up, and it kind of sounds like, yeah, like this town was like any other a month ago. It was violent. Everyone had their problems. Everything was awful. And then these alien seeds came out the sky. Because there's a little bit of speculation earlier on where the doctor's like, oh, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's an experiment, maybe it's, mutation. He goes through like a bunch of things it could be. But it turns out it's alien seeds that were traveling through the cosmos and finally landed on Earth and started.
To a nice, ripe, topsoil farmland.
Yes. So, like, when they start talking about this, they're like, hey, yeah, we like this. This is great. Like, once you're turned, you won't be mad. You'll be part of the whole, part of the society, part of the group. And this is kind of like, where the conformity like subtext really starts to like come into it, and this idea of like, you want us to be part of your well-oiled machine rather than individuals. And like at one point they say, oh, you won't have any fear and you won't feel any emotions like love. And of course Becky's like, no, I don't want to live in a world where I don't feel love. I want to love and feel fear and feel all these things, which also even just brings in some other like science fiction ideas into my head. Like, I start thinking about stuff like 1984, where it's like you're not allowed to feel anything, or even more whatever, like Equilibrium.
I Equilibrium.
Yeah. Because that's literally like
you
dampening.
Always bring up Equilibrium.
Yeah, well, it's literally dampening the emotions and shit. So like, it brings up all these like classic sci-fi ideas of suppressing humanity and just being part of the greater machine of the life force or whatever.
Yeah, I mean the temptation to not have anything bad or happen to anybody is great, but like the sacrifice of like the other end of that, of having anything great happen to you, is also bad. So the idea of these two people who are divorced and have like found love again are not, or you think you'd be kind of tempted by that, almost like, especially after going through a divorce. And it sounds like our lead actor in the beginning is a bit curmudgeon until he meets up with is it Betty? No, Becky.
I've only said it 20 times in this review.
I don't know why I doubted it. Yeah, Becky.
Becky's a really normal name.
Yeah, it's a very California name. I love it. So like, but even before that, like, he was kind of masking his like his curmudgeoniness about things with jokes and stuff like that. But like, the idea that someone like that would fall prey to the idea of just not having any emotions anymore, I think would be more tempting. But the fact that he's got this love, this passion for this woman again, that he just can't conform to that. So I think it's actually a really nice parallel to all the other stuff that's happening, but like a nice love story.
I think that's a really interesting point you bring up, actually, is that these are two characters, like it's cool that they're both divorced because it's unique for this time period, but it actually kind of fits into this theme of like, yeah, these are characters that have been through a lot of pain because they've went through divorces, but they've found something again. They've found that will to live again. Not that they look depressed before, but they seem happy. They've basically went through this thing where they've felt this pain and then found happiness again. So they know that sometimes you have to have the pain to get the happiness, but they're still not tempted by this potential just sterile existence where they don't feel anything. If anything, it makes it more, because it's one thing like, because let's say you were doing this with teenagers, right? And it was like two teenagers who had never been in love before and they feel they're madly in love. Like, of course they wouldn't be tempted because they never felt the bad side of it yet.
Yeah.
Like, so it means more that these two more mature characters who are not that old, but they're old enough that they've been divorced, feel differently. They still feel that they're wanting to fight for, their personalities and their individualities. So, I think it's a really interesting choice of character. Whether the movie made that choice or the book made that choice, I have no idea, because obviously the characters in the remake from the 70s or the 2007 version that I've also seen, like, they're all very different. Like, none of them have the same set of characters. They all have very different, ensembles of types of character. So I'm not sure which ones fit the book more or which ones are like just movie creations. But given this was first, yeah.
Can I make a complaint about the 70s version before we talk about it real quick? And it's not anything to do with the movie. It is about like top 10 lists or like clip shows for the 70s film. They always use the last freaking scene of the movie.
Yeah, don't say what it is.
When they talk about it. I'm not going to say what it is, because that would be going against my principles. But although we are in spoilers.
Not for every movie. We're in spoilers for just this movie. No, it's kind of like the Statue of Liberty from another movie that I won't say what it is.
Yeah, I don't know why they do that. Like, so many, like every single time someone says, "Oh, Invasion of the Body Snatchers" with Donald Sutherland, they always show the same freaking clip, and I'm like, why would you use that one?
Yeah, no, it's the same with these other movies where they all because the famous scenes from the ending, they always use the ending of certain movies to show it, and it's frustrating. Yeah, Planet of the Apes is one. I feel like maybe not so much of clips, but people always like just talk about the ending of Sixth Sense, and I'm like, you know what? You don't have to be a dick and spoil it. Like, sure, if you're writing an article or making a video about the Sixth Sense, people who have not seen it can opt out of actually reading or watching the thing, but when you just throw it into the middle of like a list and you're like, oh yeah, they had a Sixth Sense when blah blah blah, it's like, no, what? You just ruined that for someone probably because you just threw it in with no warning. So we are actually having some technical difficulties with a big delay, so if this sounds a bit stilted as we get towards the end, apologies, but we're going to try and muscle it. We don't want to have to delay and record like the last chunk of the episode like days later and delay the episode, so we're going to try and stick with it and just see how we get on. But so they're hiding out in his office. They've tried to get away. They've tried to use a payphone. At one point, like the car mechanic like snuck a pod into their car, and they take it out and burn it. Like he just stops the car, gets out and pulls out the pods and like gets a flare and is like, I'm burning this shit. And just sets it alight. But then you've got all the stuff where they've been held captive in his doctor's office, and they're just waiting for them to fall asleep so that the transfer will happen.
He gives them
but
like
he's able to,
like pills or something to keep. I guess like caffeine pills or something to keep them awake. Which I would think you'd want to hold on to those to like the very last minute you need them, because caffeine will come with a crash.
Yeah, and she definitely crashes.
Oh yeah.
As they're going up the hills in a minute, because she starts like just being carried because she can't like continue anymore. And he's doing all right. Yeah, to be fair, like she does have a couple of good like sort of progressive moments where he's like, okay, there's 3 of them and 1 of me, so I'm going to have to use this blade and maybe inject one of them with this thing that I've just got out of the fridge. And she's like, no, it's not 3 against 2 or 3 against 1. It's 3 against 2. And she grabs like a scalpel and is like, I'm going to help you. And she does. I mean, she ends up only helping a little bit, but it's at least enough. It's like, no, I'm not just going to be a damsel. Give me a weapon. I'll get involved. But it does end up her being like, having to be carried because she can't stay awake any longer.
So weak.
Yeah, I feel like I've never like. Obviously, you feel tired when you're out and about and walking and stuff. But I feel like if I'm on my feet and going up a hill, I won't just start to like. I mean, maybe eventually you'd start to collapse, but like.
Well, when you've been up for a long time and you probably have had a lot of adrenaline rushes because you're fighting for your life, and that hill was really steep, and I mean they had stairs for a little bit. Stairs like that are definitely going to wear you out, but then also they have to go through the woods where they have to like, navigate boulders and stuff so they don't fall off. So I think it would be pretty draining.
It probably would be. I guess I've just never been in a position where I'm ready to collapse like that. And it's admittedly self-inflicted, but I have had some, long awake sessions in my life.
Yeah. Well, in Navy boot camp, the last 2 days of like tests are called battle stations, where you go into like a simulated thing and they keep you up for 48 hours and they make you do a bunch of physical tests while sleep deprived, and it is pretty grueling. And then when you actually are able to hit your bunk after everything, like the crash hits you and it hits hard. And I've had a couple of like other things where I've just been like, I have to pull an all-nighter or whatever, and you don't know, like when you get super tired, your body like finds little moments to rest. The boot camp one is the only one where I had to do a lot of physical activity while being sleep deprived, though. So that's the only thing I had to like really compare it to. But like, it's strange. Your body goes into like this weird second wind, and but it's like an adrenaline rush. So you feel like, oh, like I don't even need sleep. I'm great. But then the opposite happens. The crash happens.
Yeah, the adrenaline. If you've got something to do to focus on, especially something that's a little bit intense, like you're concerned about it. Like I'm thinking like back in like my school days when I'd have an exam and I wouldn't get much sleep, like, but when you're actually in the exam, it didn't feel that bad because it's like, oh no, it's adrenaline because you're like in the moment and it's like tense and whatever. But then you get home after the exam and it's like, oh no, now I need to die. now it's time to crash. So we have this whole thing where they hide and whatever, but they leave pods in the cave because they know they must be hiding in there because they see her like sweater like on the way in. So when he goes to check something, he leaves her alone for like a minute and he comes back and this is where the switch has happened and he goes to kiss her and he stops mid-kiss and there's a great shot here. Again, there's a lot of good little moments of cinematography in this that we've kind of glossed over because we've been kind of firing through the plot kind of a little bit all over the place, but there's a close-up of her face after he's looked down and realised that it's not her, where she looks genuinely creepy. And it's just this close-up of her face looking up at him. And it's like kind of hypnotic in a creepy way. And it just, I don't know, it hits quite hard, I think.
Yeah, it kind of starts off a bit like a blurred image that gets really clearer in focus. And you can see like her eyes are kind of dead. Like she has no passion behind them anymore.
It's good stuff. And it's... because the whole movie's been about like not about their love story, I would say, but because they've been at the center of all of it and like their flirting's been there and like they've been concerned about each other over the last day when it's been really intense and they've actually feared their lives, this feels like a big deal. It hits quite hard. And then of course the movie, all on the bookend, which we'll get to kind of separately, But the real end of the movie is him running into the highway and just yelling. He's trying to like grab people. He sees some pods in a truck, like they're already spreading throughout the country, and he just starts yelling, "They're coming for you! You're next!" And he practically yells it straight into the camera. And it does feel like, because I, even though I'd watched it maybe 5-6 years ago, I'd forgotten the bookend stuff. So I really was kind of expecting it to just cut to the end when he yelled that, and I thought, oh, that's your ending. That's your creepy, they're coming after everyone ending.
That's a great drive-in, because now like your date has to spend the night because she'll be too scared.
Yeah, she's too scared. Yes, absolutely. And my house is closer than Medbay, so that's a Babylon 5 reference for anyone who didn't get it.
Of the drive-in, right? Is for hookups.
It's the point of horror movies.
Let's go see a monster movie.
Yeah. But obviously we do, like, the one thing I don't like about the movie, because even the one at the start doesn't bother me that much. The one that bothers me is the last bookend. Because it gives it like a kind of happy ending where there's like a little bit at the end where they just like, they don't believe him, they think he's crazy, but then this guy comes in who's been injured in a truck accident, and the guy mentions, oh yeah, there was these things in the back of the truck, there were like these pods, and everyone looks at him like, wait a minute,
seed pods?
And immediately they go off running, yelling, we have to call the CIA, call the FBI, call all these people. I don't even know if the CIA existed yet, but call all these people. And the movie ends with like the doctor just like sort of sighing in relief, like, okay, everyone knows, and they're going to like stop it. Like the government's going to do something about it. And it feels like a really tacked on happy ending that doesn't feel like it was supposed to be there originally.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I would love to see this movie without those. Because I think the movie works great without them.
to be honest, I don't think it affects it that much, though. I know it can, in a way it does, because it does say that the ending's going to, at the end it's saying everything's going to be okay because they know about it, but I feel like it's really easy to just ignore this little bit because it doesn't really upset how good the rest of the movie is.
The actual, like, seeing the pods being grown in the farm, in the fields and stuff, and then seeing them being loaded up on trucks, and like knowing that a whole town is already affected, and everything's, more towns, at least another place is going to be affected because they've been sending trucks out now. And the truck that you see like says Los Angeles, San Diego, Portland on it. So like, it's going to at least those big metropolitan places. So like, I don't know, like I like the dour ending more. I
think it makes more sense for this movie.
It's also like, how is the government going to keep up with that? Like, it's already spread so much, it seems impossible.
Yeah, but the end of the movie, the tone is very much, oh no, they've got it covered, it's fine.
Yeah, don't worry about it. You can sleep tonight.
It definitely feels like a studio note. It feels like we can't end this movie on the, like, everyone's screwed kind of ending where he's yelling. And even if you don't read it that way, even if you don't read it as like, oh no, the world's going to be infected and it's going to spread everywhere, if you just read it as he looks like a crazy person now that no one will ever listen to, that also kind of works in kind of like a more subtle way of like, oh, if you actually see the world for what it really is and try and tell people, most of the world's going to ignore you because it's too inconvenient to listen to you and do something about it.
They're already their own type of pod person. Hive-minded. And
I mean, I wasn't going with that. I was going with more of a, like it's easy to say we have to do this to fix the world, but how many people will actually listen to you and actually, be proactive in doing something? Look at, climate change, look at whatever. Like, take your pick. Like you could read it kind of maybe a little bit like that. Not that I'm saying it's going for that necessarily, but just like, there's a few more ways you could take that. But like, I don't think the little tacked on ending really hurts it that much. I think, especially since when I watch it, like, I very separate it in my head where I'm like, oh, this is the little thing the studio wanted to be added on. The real ending was him yelling in the highway.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it feels when I watch it, and maybe people don't agree with that, but it works. But it's an excellent movie, and it's it's a testament that most people, to the next version, the 78 version, most people will say they prefer that version. And I think it's a testament to how good that is, because it's not because this one is, even if I agree or disagree with that, I'm not going to spoil if I agree with that, but most people do say that. It's not because this one is seen as poor. I don't think
Yeah,
anyone
this
looks
one's
at this.
not a weak entry
No,
at all.
this is this is one of the best 50s science fiction movies. I'm going to say it. Like, maybe The Day the Earth Stood Still is better. I think I would probably say that. But compared to something like other stuff we've done on the show, like we've done Them, we haven't done a lot of 50s sci-fi.
This one feels way more competent and like I don't know. It's a better story than that for sure, but than just a generic monster movie. It's better than The Blob.
The 50s one for sure, yeah.
Yeah, not the 80s one.
Yeah, we love the 80s one.
A man gets folded in half backwards and sucked down a drain. Like it's never gonna beat that.
No, I think I think this is. I'd have to like check all the 50 sci-fi that I've seen. Never mind the ones that we've done on the show.
Yeah, I definitely would put The Day There Still as number 1 50 sci-fi. But I think this one, you're right. It's probably number 2.
This is probably second. Like I can't. I'm going to where is it? Movies by decade. I'm going to our playlists here because I've got a 70s decade playlist, and I just wanted, or not 70s, sorry, a pre-70s.
Pre-70s, okay.
Yeah, well, we haven't done enough that I felt like it was worth doing a 60s playlist, a 50s playlist, a 40s playlist. So it's just everything before the 70s. In one list.
I don't know how I feel about the 70s version because that is the one that I think I remember more than this one going into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember that one being scary and like when I watched it.
Yeah, this another one we've did was War of the Worlds. This is better than that, I think.
I think so too.
I genuinely think this is a great movie. I think it's a great movie. There's a little tacked on ending that's not, whatever, but I think the subtext, intentional or not, really enriches it, and I think the direction is really strong. I think the two lead characters are fun to watch and have a good chemistry. It's still a little old school in places. Like some of the flirtations do feel of an older time. It doesn't feel like a modern couple flirting.
She's always dressed for like the Met Gala.
Yeah.
In every single scene. And you wear that to the doctor? Okay, well, she was meeting up with an old boyfriend, so maybe that's why she looks so good the whole time.
But even every man's always wearing a suit. That's a very of the time.
Yeah, she's got these like big old diamonds hanging off her ears. All these.
So, yeah. But which is all just to say that I think this movie's great. I think it holds up really well.
Mm-hmm.
There's maybe some logic holes you can nitpick at if you want to, but for the most part, the escalation is paced very well. The tension's paced very well. Strong moments of direction, all that stuff. It's all good. I have very little to say bad about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, except for the obvious, which doesn't seem like it was the fault of the movie.
No.
Like the director didn't seem like he wanted those bookends to be there, and who knows? Maybe audiences would have wanted that to be there either, like a 50s audience. Who knows? Yeah,
it's entirely possible. We ultimately when we do old movies, and so sometimes we'll get a comment from someone who's clearly twice our age, right? And I'm not saying this to be mean to them. But they get a little snooty about, you're not putting yourself in the time that it came out or whatever. But I'm of the belief that a good movie will work no matter what perspective you're coming at it from, right? A good movie will stand the test of time.
Our first one was The Day the Earth Stood Still, a 50s sci-fi movie that I rated a 10 because I thought, it's just a really well done, if not perfect film for that time that still works today. And it's not just because it works today that, you would rate it that. It was just like, no, this is a masterpiece. Like, I really believe that.
Yeah, but sometimes they'll say, you don't like this thing, and that's just because you're young and you're not from that time. And
you want action movies, you don't want things to be slow. We get that one a lot. Like, you don't like slow movies or whatever.
You just want Marvel movies, which couldn't be the furthest thing from my taste right now. I am so bored of modern mainstream superhero movies. It's like unfathomable to me that someone could say that to me. But it's people who only watch that one review and never hear my opinions on anything else, and that's fine, whatever. But I feel like that comes up, and I'm like, no, when you come into a movie that we critique for being whatever from the 50s or 60s, I would point them to Day the Earth Stood Still. I'd point them to this review and say, no, this is when it works. This is when it still functions, and we have very little to complain about. And it's hitting what it's aiming for very well. it's ahead of its time in some ways, sure, but I think, arguably in a lot of ways, a lot of good movies are ahead of their time. That's just not.
Well, even the part that I wouldn't say complained about, but I was confused about, like how the pod, thing works, and like the way you brought it up, like it was probably just a budget constraint or like a constraint of how much they were allowed to show of this spooky thing, that we didn't get to see that part. I'm like, okay, well, I can't hold that against the movie,
Yeah.
Like, they did the best with what they could, and it was an effectively creepy scene. And
I suggested those things. Honestly, I don't think any of those things are even the big reason. I think the reason why that scene plays the way it does is because they wanted the moment where he thinks it's still her, and then realizes, no, it's not. She's already switched. And it's just so quick that, like, you thought, oh, that's so quick that this has worked differently than the previous times. And I don't think it is. I think it's just they wanted that moment so bad that they didn't care. We're just going to do it.
But it was creepy.
It was creepy. It was effective, and that's what they're going for.
Yeah, and I'm willing to look past it, especially for my rating.
Which I guess we're at, so go on then, what you rate?
Yeah, I really love this. I think I'm gonna give it a 9, which seems pretty high, but like, honestly, it's great. Like, I think the subtext, like you say, whether intentional or not, elevates this movie to some of the best of the 50s, at least as far as sci-fi is concerned. And I appreciate the love story and the connection between the two leads. I think it's just super great. And the story is creepy. It's well directed. It's a great movie.
I feel like if I was behind this movie and everyone was reading into it and saying, oh, this is why it stands out amongst the 50 sci-fi, because this and Day the Earth Stood Still have all this great subtext, I would keep my mouth shut about it not being intentional if that was the case. I'd be like, yes, 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 this is all.
You
like,
Tommy Wiseau it.
Yeah, Tommy Wiseau it. But in this case, it would probably come off quite believable. Like, yeah, you'd get the adoration you're deserving of. Or
yes,
not deserving of.
I'm a brilliant director / writer.
But here's the thing, though. When me and David on Collector's Cut, our non-sci-fi, non-horror podcast where we do franchises and like themes of movies, go check out the Collector's Cut. But our first ever episode was Dirty Harry, and I didn't even realize this was the same director as I was watching. I probably did check the director when we did that and saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I've since forgotten and then looked it up again for this. But like, that movie as well is full of like subtext of its era. Like, it's made that movie was 1971, and Dirty Harry's this relic in a world that's changing. This world that's changing into a more modern society, and he's this like old school cop from the time before political correctness, and there's like it's very subtext, but there's a kind of a thing in here, like his reaction to anything that's sexual, that's not traditional, is kind of like disgust, like, and not just like stuff like like gay people and things like that, but even just like seeing people who are more free or more like multi-partners or into kinky stuff. Yeah, like he reacts with this level of disgust. And it's kind of like, it's meant to be this examination of this character who's a relic of an old time, but he can still do some good or whatever in this new world, and how he's fitting into that new world. There's a lot, like, me and David had such a great conversation of that first Dirty Harry movie because it's so layered with commentary of its time.
It's good to get someone like Clint Eastwood too, someone who, your dad watched on screen as the hero and the archetypal character of the hero all the time in the westerns.
It's so funny though that he felt like the old school guy of a previous time in 1971, and here we are in 2023 and he's still kicking around making movies as the gruff old guy.
Still making Oscar bait movies though. Like, I don't like his new movies.
No, nor do I
anymore.
It's been a while since I've cared about his movies, but yes, he's still doing it. So.
If there's a movie that looks kind of good and it says directed by Clint Eastwood, I'm like, oh, that's too bad. Although I am a little bit curious about The Mule. I don't think that he directed that one, but
yeah, he was just in that, I think.
It seemed like such a crazy concept that maybe I would watch that.
Anywho, so my rating. So I'm not going to go quite as high as a 9. I've been very praising of the film. I think I'm going to 8.5, which reflects, because I gave Day the Earth Stood Still, I think, a 9 as well. Where you give it a 10. So just to compare it to that in terms of like step down.
You can change your rating for the Day the Earth Stood Still.
I'm good.
Whenever you want.
I don't feel I need to. I'm saying my logic tracks with my previous ratings
Give
and
it a
what I've said.
9.5. I mean, even if movies are rated the same, you could still have a preference for one you like more.
That is true. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying, I think the tacked on ending and bookend start, gives it a little nod.
If that weren't there, it might be higher for me. But
Yeah. So
alas,
I'm gonna say 8.5. It's very good. But no, I'm saying that in the context of I think 50 sci-fi has a couple of great examples, and there's a lot of it that's quite fun. But I would say in general, as far as my ratings and critique of it goes, I hold sci-fi from later decades to a higher standard. I think they're of a better, average quality.
well, I mean, the next decade we get a lot of 10s, so or at least 2.
The 60s?
Mm-hmm.
The ones you're thinking of though are both right at the end of the 60s though.
Yeah, but they're great.
Because I wouldn't consider the 60s a great decade for sci-fi. I would say it almost calmed down a bit, and then right at the end is where it started to ramp up again into the 70s.
Planet of the Apes.
In 2001.
2001.
Yes. I know and I agree one of them is a 10. 2001 is a 10. I'm not going to argue that.
You're a fool. You're a fool.
Plus, hey, coming soon on Top 10 Project is going to be my Top 10 of 1999. And what movie do I always get moaned at from Tara for rating a 9.5? We'll see where The Matrix places on the Top 10 Project.
Unbelievable. Matrix is a masterpiece.
I kind of agree with that, but I don't necessarily think masterpiece equals a 10.
That's literally what the rating means.
There's no book that says a masterpiece is a 10 or a 10's a masterpiece.
IGN says that.
IGN is not some gospel that should be adhered. The IGN say lots of stupid things too.
I think they also gave Joker a 10.
Exactly. Ignore everything they have said about anything ever, okay?
Oh, okay. We don't need to get into your butthurtness about IGN's video game rating system.
But no, I'm complaining about the Joker rating, which is not a video game.
I know, but they mostly rate video games.
That's true. But
Except for big movies, I guess they also rate.
The Joker's one of those things where I'm like, wait, is the decimal point in the wrong place? Not that I would give it a 1. I think that's too harsh. But
No, it's like a 5 at max.
But I would understand the 1 more than a 10. That's all I'm saying. It would make more sense to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so 9.5, really strong, and obviously in between these Transformers sequels, this is exactly the sort of thing that I think we both wanted in our lives.
What's coming up next time?
Well, funnily enough, we have Transformers: The Last Night.
Gross.
Starring Anthony Hopkins, who was probably alive when this came out, I imagine. He's an old man. So we're going to be doing the 5th Transformers movie, and then 2 weeks after that we'll be doing the new one that comes out.
And then we'll never have to watch them again.
Yeah. Not those ones. New ones, potentially, but not those ones.
Nobody buy tickets for this new movie.
Well, apparently it's not tracking very well, but they've already made an animated one for next year, so there's at least one more that we'll have to do.
I mean, when I bought my ticket because the pre-orders came out for the ticket, and I thought, well, I know we have to do it for the show, so let me get a good seat at least. I was the only one who had purchased the ticket, so the theater was empty other than my ticket.
The ship might have sailed on Transformania.
Well, the last one was about a little girl, so nobody wanted to watch that. Where's all the military?
I think John Cena was the military dude in that one.
He was hilarious in that one, actually.
Yeah. I'm not promising anything. I might rewatch Bumblebee before the new one, just because I barely remember it. And all the other ones are fresh in my head, just for comparison's sake, so. And it was
just
better.
Just rewatch our review. That's what I would suggest to all of you out there.
I don't know. I hate watching our old content.
Oh, I don't.
I'm like, oh my god, I said stupid things. Why have I said all this? Oh, I'm awful.
It's on the internet forever by your choice.
Anyway, that is the show. That is our thoughts on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Let us know what you think of this original film. And yes, we do plan on doing all the other versions down the line. Not too soon, but we'll probably do the 78 version sometime later this year, I imagine. Maybe we'll do like a remake season and do...
There's a 90s one also, right?
There's a 90s one that I've never seen, and then there's the 2007 one with Nicole Kidman that's called The Invasion.
And Daniel Craig's in that one too.
Yeah. And there may be another one as well, but those are the ones that I know off the top of my head.
Yeah, the 90s one, I remember the poster because it kind of looked like Showgirls.
Yeah, I've never even seen anything from the 90s one. I don't know anything about it, but I know it exists.
The poster looked like the Showgirls poster, but like spooky.
Oh, I can't wait. I mean, obviously we'll do any sci-fi, so we'll do Hollow Man at some point, probably because we've done the Invisible Man movies and we like doing Verhoeven sci-fi movies. But I'm looking forward to a Verhoeven season on Collector's Cut, so I can do a bunch of his non-sci-fi movies that I've not seen.
Yeah.
I want to watch the horny lesbian nun movie that he did.
Oh yeah, me too.
Because that looked great.
Was it Black Book?
Black Book
That's a good one.
Yeah, I've not seen that. That's like 15 years old now. But yeah, I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
It's
really old now.
And he's got a new one coming out, I think. So which we got to that because I was talking about what's coming up soon, and I thought of Verhoeven. But anyway, no, it's because you said Showgirls. That's what made me think about it. All right, well, that is the show. Transformers 5 next time, so look forward to that. Tell us what you thought of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the comments. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. And support the content, of course. So I did a Patreon plug. Patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. You get a bonus episode every month. Last time was Species 3. We're about to do the first ever Gamera movie. We're at about 50 bonus episodes now on Patreon. Plus, at the $5 tier, you get access to Ace Meltdown, which is a monthly show where me and Tara just talk about the different movies we watch. And Tara just hit the desk with her cat.
No, with my brain.
Ah, well, no serious damage done there then.
No.
But yeah, so go check out Patreon, and plus there's bonus episodes, a Collector's Cut, Screams After Midnight, the other stuff.
Okay, go.
Please do go and check it out. But that is the show. That has been the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer ad salsa.